Sure.
I keep coming back to the atomists. We discussed them. They say they believe in the soul, but the soul is made of soul atoms. And it's the presence of those soul atoms that gives rise to life and consciousness.
Yeah.
I don't get what's wrong with that. That seems fine. Like consciousness is a derivative of, like, it doesn't exist without matter. So
there's not merely they would see it as a sum of the parts. That is just merely a sum of the parts. Like it's not like it should be, where the sum is usually greater than the parts.
Right.
That's the only thing wrong with it, I think.
Okay.
That's just a conglomeration of things. And that conglomeration is life and consciousness, as far as I understand what the atomists believe. That's not something else. It's just those objects. Like imagine it was like a bunch of billiard balls rolling together.
Got it.
As opposed to individually.
Okay.
So it's more materialistic.
So there's this distinct thing called consciousness, which may be a byproduct of matter, but is still a separate, you treat it separately still. That's the idea.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's degrees in which somebody could be an atomist. Like the most extreme way would be it's just a bunch of things rolling together. But on the other end, it might get towards something does emerge from the combination. But the most basic way to look at it is just balls bouncing together. And that's all it is to an atomist.
Right.
That'd be the strong version. The weak version would be like, yeah, everything is physical, but you can have things emerge from it that would start being towards Aristotle. Right. And at the other end would be just that everything is abstract and nothing is concrete, which would be like the extreme form of Platonism.
Right. So I thought about this because in the lecture he worded it as they view consciousness as derivative to matter. Would it make sense then, if I wanted to be like very precise, I would say, well, consciousness is a byproduct of matter, but it's byproduct, meaning it's a creation that's treated as a separate thing too, as opposed to derivative, which is, part of.
Yeah, as far as consciousness, that view today would be like, it's called eliminative materialism, where everything reduces of the mind, it reduces to neurons, and ultimately it reduces to just particles.
Right.
That it's simply a conglomeration of particles or neurons, rather than you've got neurons which give rise to something greater than the sum of the parts.
Okay.
So that's the difference.
Okay, I see. So it's treating, there are, like consciousness is a byproduct of neurons and all those things, but it's eliminating consciousness and just saying, no, actually all that exists is this. There's no such thing as consciousness.
Yeah, everything reduces to neurons. Like there's nothing else but neurons.
Okay.
That would be the modern way of thinking about it.
Okay. Is that does that tie into Quine's qualia or whatever that guy talks about, like non-reducible? Yes. Yeah, okay.
It does. It relates to that.
Okay. So he was trying to advocate for the fact that there is this thing that is, you have to also study separately the experience of consciousness.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, there's more detail, but
yeah,
that's more philosophy of mind, which is more modern stuff. But yeah, it still originates in all this ancient Greek philosophy.
Yeah. Would you, if you're thinking, actually, let me go to Afrozen. Let's go to this one.
Yeah, did you see the link I sent about the Nietzsche from Beyond Good and Evil?
I downloaded, it was like a lot of pages, right? I downloaded it and I haven't gone through it, of his aphorisms or quotes.
Some of them are quick. Some of them are multiple pages. A few of them are just like one-liners.
Got it. No, I haven't gone through it. I was put off because it's images and then I have to like write it up, but I will go through it. It's saved.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, what were some of the ones you found? Images. there is a justice going to.
Okay, my take on this is that people are trying so hard to keep afloat that they're not even thinking of another person. They're not thinking of destruction. They're just, maybe their actions result in destructions, but it's not in destruction, but it's not malice. I was reading the first one, the bolded.
There's a justice according to which we, but no justice according to which.
Oh, you're reading a different one. I'll read it with you.
Oh, sorry, malice is rare.
Sorry,
most
we'll
better.
do both. We can do both.
Yeah. Prevention of suicide. Well, the prevention of suicide is just like people can consider it just in rare instances to kill someone. But this is weird. To which we take his death. How do you take somebody's death?
Prevent it. He wants death and you take it away from him.
Yeah, like how would one do that?
I don't know.
That is nothing.
There might be like courts. There might be courts also which evaluate a person and say, we're not going to let you, we're going to prevent you from dying. And they would punish a man to live.
I think you're just saying that there is something you should respect in someone that wants to do something that we can. Like if the person wants to take their life, that's like a decision that they make and a certain power in the individual to go through with that. As paradoxical as that might be, is better than to Nietzsche probably than somebody who drifts through their life. That like prevention of suicide is actually like weak of a person to do. That you should see what that person's deciding rather than what you're preventing.
I didn't follow that. What do you mean?
Well, Nietzsche in a way seems to be saying that the man who kills himself has a certain willpower of himself within himself to go through with it and do it. And that's worth respect in Nietzsche's eyes, I think.
Oh, okay. I read this completely differently. I read it. You know, we punish men for crimes. We take their lives. We put them on the, death row. We put them in electric chairs and give them injections. But there's no courts of law which don't allow a man to kill himself, which is, he says, is cruelty, because there may be a justice in preventing a man from dying.
It seems like there's a juxtaposition. If there is a justice to take a man's life, why would it be somehow seen as not just to let them kill themselves? It's just cruel to force them to live.
If he deserves to live, just as you evaluate a criminal deserves to be punished, this is just my take. I don't know if this is right.
Yeah.
But if you can evaluate the criminal deserves to be punished, then why can't you evaluate whether a suicidal person deserves to live and then punish him or I don't know if punish is the right word, but do the reverse of that and reward him with life by not letting him take his life, by taking away his death. Just as you take away another man's life, the criminal's life.
The way I think of usually interpreting Nietzsche is always trying to take a look at what would be or what would take a higher strength of will or higher strength or effort to go through with. And Nietzsche often makes things descriptions that way that you could even say that somebody killing themselves is still an act that takes tremendous willpower. That's not something you could do automatically. Same with everything else, that he doesn't like to think in terms of justice or morality, but that justice and morality can often be turned on their head. So you have to almost think about it in, how do you force yourself to think about it in opposite ways? That why is he saying preventing suicide is cruelty? I mean, you want to let them live, but why would that be ever seen as good? Or we take his death. It seems to be preventing the suicide, means preventing death.
Yeah.
We're taking the death, preventing death. Rather, you should let them die. It's not cruel to do that, actually. I think that's what he's trying to say. But it is a bit odd.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, there is a
Right.
juxtaposition.
Yeah, it's weird.
Each likes to put contraries next to each other to give you like a strong effect. It's more a rhetorical thing he does.
Right. Yeah, I didn't really follow or get the significance of that one, but let's move on to this bolder one. Malice is rare.
That's true.
That was the one I commented on first.
Yeah, I like the sound of this one. He's identifying the vanity in man usually.
Okay, so what is that? That I just took it to mean that most men they're not thinking about you. So when they do something malicious, it's just through lack of thinking, and they're destructive, but yeah, not out of maliciousness, just out of ignorance or idiocy or whatever.
Well, out of vanity, out of self-absorption, because they're busy with thinking about what are my problems, what's going
Right.
on in my life,
Right.
rather than bother to take the time. Oh, I want to hurt this person.
Yeah.
You know, they're busy about like, oh, how am I going to lie to myself to get through the day?
Right.
What stories I'm going to tell to make other people like me more? Like they're cared about their appearance in a second-handed way. They're all like, most are Peter Keatings. And Peter Keating wasn't really malicious per se, but he was definitely empty on the inside.
Right. Okay, so it's like a jab at Peter Keatings that they are the common.
Yeah.
They are what commonly exists, as opposed to, let's say, a TUI.
Yes. A TUI would be malicious.
Right.
Like he doesn't care just about his lot in life, but about wider philosophical things.
Yep. Would you say that so moral qualities is broader than virtues? Virtues would be a kind of moral quality. Is there anything else outside of virtues that would be a moral quality that you can think of?
Like in terms of good, I mean, there's vices or
oh yeah, okay, vices,
other
moral
good
qualities,
things
vices, virtues.
Besides character, but virtue is an aspect of character.
Right. Okay.
I'm not sure what other things are moral qualities besides virtues and vices. I never really thought about that.
This is interesting. I was reading a book on maths, and he gives a little historical introduction, and he has this view that Greeks preferred deduction because those who were philosophers didn't busy themselves in commerce and trade, and they weren't out in the world, and so they had to reason. They didn't, observe using their hands and experiment, so they had to reason they couldn't reason by analogy and induction, so they had to reason by deduction, and that's why the Greeks were so into deduction. I don't know what kind of interpretation that is, but I just thought it was interesting.
As far as philosophers, perhaps the Greek culture seemed more about your direct experience with things.
Right.
The way they dealt with a lot of poetry and performances and plays.
Right.
Philosophers probably, because that was the way they thought, because they thought that was the closest way to reason in a pure way.
Yeah.
But then again, there were people like, well, the sophists were more hands-on, I guess I would say. I mean, the sophists were very mixed, just because they at least dealt with the way things were actually, not just idealized, but the way things are, rather than even things that are like culturally based, rather than just pure abstraction. And Aristotle, of course, was a bit away from that, but I think part of it is true that deduction was something they got a hold of first. So of course you would develop some of your sciences that way first. So you would start with geometry first, because that's such a powerful tool. You got to start somewhere, but then you build up from there to more observational stuff like biology or anything else like that.
Actually, I just thought about it now. I don't agree with him that the reason they had a preference for deduction because their philosophers were like cloistered inside and they viewed commerce negatively. That's all wrong because Thales, he like that was an induction. He just looked around and said, hey, there's all these things changing. The only way you can explain it, I can think of, is that everything has some common denominator, and you have one form of something turning into a different form of something different turning in, with the same form or something like that. And then Heraclitus, like he also sort of generalized and looked at things that were changing and thought everything was changing. And then it's only with Plato that you get that anti-commerce view, right? And people in the cloistered inside. So I think he's wrong. Yeah, I think he's just it's like speculation he's making.
The Greeks were more social than we would imagine. Like even Socrates, like he did philosophy by talking to people. He was always in the world. They're in the marketplace. I mean, Diogenes even was like he was in the marketplace all the time. Sure, Aristotle was too. Plato was even probably more involved in the social landscape than you would give him credit for.
Yeah.
Politically involved even. Like every Athenian citizen was expected to be involved to some extent in the political process or legal process. So in a way, you had to participate in the culture. Any Greek was participating in a very direct way. That if anything, their deduction is when they take a break from their intense civic duty or civic responsibilities or day-to-day, they were never totally like sequestered off, I think. I think that might be a myth.
Yeah. Okay, I think he was wrong. It's just his take on what he knows.
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about like the Pythagoreans, that's different. But as far as the Greeks as a whole, I think he's wrong too.
Okay, this one doesn't seem to make me think that much. It seems pretty like generic and obvious. All right, yeah, don't waste your time loving some imaginary being. That's all I'm extracting out of this. Like your love should be for this earth and people on this earth, not.
Yeah, that sounds like a portion of a bigger piece rather than it might just be a portion.
Okay. Yeah, I think so too.
Some of these are just portions of an aphorism.
Yeah, this definitely looks like it's a portion. All right, let's go to Branden then.
Yeah.
All right, so I read 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, and I have some curious things to discuss, actually. So let's see what he says here. He says, with high self-esteem, I'm more likely to persist in face of difficulties. With low self-esteem, I'm more likely to give up or go through the motions of trying without really giving my best. Research shows that high self-esteem subject will persist at a task longer than low self-esteem. Yeah, so I was curious, like, okay, well, if that's true, like, how doesn't it vary? Like, don't you see it varying across different fields? Like someone has like confidence in one field, but they say, oh, I'm terrible. Like they're good at business and they're like, I hate maths. I don't know maths at all. Like afraid of maths, I guess you could even put it. Or someone who can draw really well and has confidence in painting or design, but then is like afraid of maths. And there's like, I guess there's a difference between dismissing a subject as uninteresting or irrelevant and being afraid of it, like, which is more closer to like, I would say is more indicative of what he's describing here, this low self-esteem. But so I guess my question is this, is like, okay, so he's saying that in general, you're more likely to, if you have low self-esteem, is go through motions of trying without really trying at best. But there are variations in this, like across the board. It's not like there's this one, I don't know how much there's one generalized thing in the background, because I do observe people who are good in one thing, but they don't have confidence in another thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think research related to this, not everybody uses the concept self-esteem to describe that kind of feeling. There's other related feelings that are just as legitimate, I think. Yes, your question is right that you should ask, of course, as well, does it depend on the field, or is it context dependent? Like, does esteem just apply to a narrow set of things you do? Is it more of a wide characteristic that covers many things? Is it more general? Is it more specific? But I think most research getting into this sort of thing is that it does tend to be generalized. That like the concept of grit, something like perseverance is related, and it doesn't really matter what subject it is, that character trait is something consistent across multiple contexts.
Yep.
I think self-esteem research is very similar to that. And I think generally it's followed that trend. That is a general capacity or a general thing that goes on. It's not as specific, it's not highly context dependent. Or at least that is a way you could look for. That's what you would research. You would look at in what ways is it generalizable rather than just specific to like a thing you'd only do sometimes.
Right. Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, there are definitely people who are, I would say, are more confident across the board. And it doesn't mean they're interested in some, like if they weren't good at maths, it doesn't mean they're like afraid of it. They're just like, it doesn't interest me. And there's a difference between that and being afraid of a particular field. So indicative of high self-esteem would be someone who has a generalized confidence that if they do apply their mind to something, they could learn.
Yeah, I think research does bear that out generally.
Right. Okay.
I don't know all the literature in the field, but the literature I do know of, it is pretty consistent across multiple contexts.
So this is actually from the next one is from the Vision of Ayn Rand. He talks about a person who's like openly mystical. And then he says there's the attitude of some, he said it's reprehensible, but then the attitude of someone who says, well, maybe the other side of the moon does consist of rose gardens and Coca-Cola factories. Maybe it doesn't. Who am I to know? He says, so there's this approach too, someone who's not like openly or not like openly at war with reality, claiming some random arbitrary fact. But he's like, well, who am I to know? Okay, so in this example, he says, if I, in this example, acted like a mystic openly at war with reality, then he, the neutral observer, was guilty of something worse. He granted equal status to mysticism and reality, refusing to differentiate or take sides between them. Why is that worse? Like, in what makes that worse exactly than someone who's openly at war with reality?
Well, I do know he gives a full argument of that kind of that position in Vision of Ayn Rand. I recall.
That's what the quote is from. That's what the quote is from.
My bad. Yeah, no wonder I recognize it. I would think it's worse because you're not making a decision. You're not judging reality. That it is necessary to judge reality first and foremost, at least with some truth status. That this person wants to avoid saying true or false. They want to avoid judgment or deny the possibility of judgment. And at least the mystic will say, this is true, this is false, and reach some conclusion about the world. Even if you're fighting reality, at least you're saying there is a truth, there is a real answer, a right answer. And so he's saying that, morally speaking, it's worse to take no position about knowledge and to take no judgment whatsoever. It's as if you're treating it that everything is equally worth consideration without regard for whether it might be true or how truth is determined. Just, well, whatever, who knows anything, which is much worse, I would say.
So someone like Hitler would be better than a person who's like, well, who am I to know? I better just follow, like, I can't think this through. It seems a bit weird. Like, I don't get someone who's like openly trying to tear apart reality by making things up that don't make any sense is better morally than someone who's like, well, doesn't feel confident and goes, who am I to know? I'm interested what standard this is that he's saying it's worse than, so like, because that would mean, wouldn't it logically follow then that people who followed Hitler because they're not sure and they're afraid are worse than Hitler himself?
Let's do something. It might be equivalent. It's hard to decide. I mean, in broad strokes, of course, like, it is better judged than not to judge. But on the other hand, what does it mean to deliberately? That's hard to say. I mean, I want to say that there's something else that changes that context.
Yeah.
Like, why would it be worse? Is a Nazi being a Nazi worse than taking no stance? I'm not sure.
That's why I'm interested, because it would be
Yeah.
like, what is going on in that? There's something there that there's some standard he's using, which I'd like to know, which is interesting. Like, how, I don't know how you'd say that, but okay, if he thinks that's true, like, I'm curious why, so that's why it came up, but I'll put that down.
Yeah, I mean, they're all different kinds of evasion. I mean, one is evading judgment at all. One is evading like standards of rational judgment, or you evading the use of rationality. I mean, there could be another type of evasion here that we're thinking about, maybe like an evasion of like evasion of independence. Like, you could say there's a different violation in a different way. Like, violating your independent thought is also an extreme violation, just as much as maybe saying that you can't make a judgment. And it's like, you say, oh, he knows, or who knows what I know? I don't know anything. That person knows everything. So just do what they do. That might be equivalent to saying, who knows anything? I don't care. I'm not going to judge. I mean, they could be equivalent in different ways, morally speaking. They're both as destructive to the individual, but just in different ways. I think that's one way you could look at. You just break apart what they're evading exactly.
It's a pretty hard one.
It is, yes. We had to break it down like that, and then you gradually figure it out.
The antithesis is the narrow gate through which error prefers to worm its way to truth. Is this his view of how you reach truth by looking at lies, and then?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
That does sound like his method. Like, you're considering opposites in order to arrive at like clear your mind in a way that you could think about things in opposite terms. Then you could arrive at the truth by considering things in ways you don't normally.
Right. I thought this one was interesting. Lack of intimacy. Lack of intimacy among friends is a mistake that cannot be censored without becoming irreparable. What?
Evidence is friends that cannot be. But you can't fix it. And lack of intimacy among friends. Yeah, you can't condemn it without making it worse or even irreparable. It's almost like he's saying, when
Okay.
Lack of intimacy among friends, like, you drift and then you're not supposed to say anything.
Oh, I see. Okay, like once
That's
you
how I
say
get it.
something, right? If you've already drifted, like, what good is it to say anything? Is that's
Yeah.
sort of the approach? Like, oh, you're not giving me enough attention. Is that sort of the idea that you can't say
Maybe,
that?
but like, and if you do, then you ruin it. I mean, I almost experienced that maybe once or twice. Like, if you lack intimacy with a friend, like, do you say anything? And if you do say something, it almost makes it worse. Like, puts the nail in the coffin. Like, if you point it out, it's like, oh yeah, I don't like you very much, and like, it dies. I think that's kind of what he's describing.
Well, I mean, the difficulty is, though, like, let's say someone's in a relationship, the advice would be, oh, if your partner's not paying you enough attention, don't say anything. That would be a weird way to, that would be a weird way to interpret it.
Yeah.
Which then doesn't work. Like, I guess it's context specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, you could just look at it and say broadly that if someone doesn't take interest in you, then your words won't make a difference. Like if you just say, hey, take interest in me, that's not going to add anything.
Seems like it, yeah.
All right. So poor self-esteem correlates with irrationality, blindness to reality, rigidity. What's that? Fear of the
Dogmatism,
new
I
and
think.
what?
I think of it like being dogmatic. That's how I think of it. Like you don't want to adapt. You don't want to change your thoughts. What you believe it now, and you're not going to change your mind.
Right. Okay. That would be that. That's basically irrationality and blindness to reality, but an
Yes.
aspect of, right?
Yeah, it's just more description of the same thing.
Right. Okay. Like you've got your position, you've got your politics, you've got your philosophy. To hell with everything else. Like if it's just going to piss you off because you don't want to have to think about it.
Yeah.
Got it. Mechanical life. The higher our self-esteem, the stronger the drive to express ourselves, reflecting the sense of richness within. The lower our self-esteem, the more urgent the need to prove ourselves or to forget ourselves by living mechanically and unconsciously. What does it mean, like live mechanically, and how does this mechanical living help? I assume maybe it's the same thing as live unconsciously, but mechanically is that like suppressing feelings and just doing things? Is that what you think that is?
Forget ourselves by living mechanically and conscious. I tend to think he means it metaphorically.
Okay.
And not literally. Like not literally mechanical, but
so
as if you are.
Yeah, what's your take on what it means then? What does it look like to live mechanically?
Taking for granted what's right or wrong, living by tradition, just living by the feeling of the culture, rather than reasoning it out, halfway thinking, partial thinking.
And it helps you forget yourself because what is it? It helps you forget yourself. Like,
yeah, it's just like by minimizing your thinking, you're never going to consider your failings. You're not going to consider anything else. It's just
okay.
So you either have to prove yourself or forget yourself. You either got to always demonstrate that you need something more than what you are, or that you need to be more than what you are, or you're just not even bothering.
Right. Okay. So it's like a way to, I guess this relates to what his concept of defense value, right? Which is like you pursue something because it distracts you in some way and you don't have to think.
Yeah, and I don't think there's in between. That you can't just do neither. Then no one just has low self-esteem and that's just what it is. You're saying either you prove yourself, either you desire to prove yourself, or you don't bother thinking at all.
Right.
It's one of the two. Or maybe both at the same time. Sometimes you're like anxious and need to prove yourself. Other times you don't want that anxiety, so you don't think about it. You maybe go bouncing back and forth.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, I think there's something to that. I was just thinking about now, like if I'm uncomfortable, like I've got to, we easily build up a arsenal of habits that distract us. So like a really simple one would be, if I would be uncomfortable or anxious or something, I might, like, for example, just distract myself with my phone or like check a message, right? That's what he's talking about, mechanical, because it's habit based and it's unthinking, and it kind of suppresses feeling. All right, cool. That's interesting. This one was weird. I'm like, why is this even an aphorism? So that's why I put it in, because I was like, why is that even an aphorism?
That's just getting embarrassed. I don't think it means much. It's just a weird one, I think. Doesn't seem to mean anything important.
Let's see. This one. So the ability to think long range makes you less amorous?
No, I'm thinking, I mean,
Oh, a partner
literally
maybe.
short-sighted. He's talking
Huh?
about just
What?
love,
Oh, okay.
that you won't be hurt by love. You won't be heartbroken in a way that like you're not looking too deep into them or deep into the future of that love. In a way, saying that people only love hard because they're not ready for the disappointment of love. He's very cynical about love, so
I see. Okay,
you're
short-sighted
just
people
gonna
like
get hurt. You're not looking ahead if you're not realizing. That's just gonna spurn you.
right. Yeah, that is quite cynical.
I know that for sure, that he was very cynical about relationships. That's why I think it's actually not just anything deeper than this. Like life hurts sometimes,
Yeah.
and sometimes people are just too enthusiastic about it, and then they get hurt.
This one is interesting. I know there's a lot of text in here, but they're all from different passages and they relate to this, which is not from his words. This is actually in Opar. He says, Leonard says something like, you treat men as self-responsible beings. So because of that, you judge them on their conscious convictions, their actions, and not on, you don't try and psychologize and excuse them or condemn them on the basis of hidden demons. They're not victims of their own psychopathologies. And here I've actually said the reverse, because based on what Branden is writing, it does seem like he's saying that. I mean, I've got thoughts on this, but I'm curious to get your take. It almost seems to be saying like we have these unconscious life scripts. Like he talks, let's see, I'll bold stuff that's relevant if you want to start reading. And then he gives anecdotes with like unconscious life scripts, things, basically this is what Leonard says is the exact opposite of what's supposed to happen. You don't condemn people on the basis of inner demons.
Oh, just a minute, please.
Sure.
One second.
Yep.
Hey, Alessandra, are you there?
Okay.
So where we leave? Okay.
Yeah. So just this idea of, you'll see in these passages, Branden talks about, people acting in ways that are self-destructive unconsciously. And so the reason I put that up again is because, you have in Opar Leonard talking about man being self-consciously determined and not to be condemned on the basis of, or condemned or excused on the basis of hidden demons. Whereas here we've got, someone talking about, and it seems reasonable, it seems interesting, like talking about life scripts, unconscious life scripts, as if you're just automatically guided by your inner demons to do things. And so I wanted to pick this apart. And he gives anecdotes, like someone who falls in love but doesn't believe happiness is possible, so finds a way to destroy their relationship. Someone who knows on a deep level they're not destined to be happy, and then they find a way to destroy a relationship, and that kind of thing in here, right?
Yeah. Was there a question in that in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it was all this text. So the question is, doesn't this contradict? So this is a kind of depth psychology interpretation where we have all these secret Jungian motivations, and they're just driving our actions unknowingly. We're just being driven to some unconscious life script program into a subconscious. There's like a logic to our unconscious logic to our self-destruction, and just getting that seems to conflict with this view that, okay, we're self-determined, we shouldn't condemn other people on the basis of, we shouldn't condemn or excuse other people on the basis of in hidden psychological inner demons. We shouldn't psychologize. So that's what I would sort of
kind of agree with you. I do have issues with this phrasing, actually, for the same reasons. I'm not sure there is enough justification here for Branden to phrase it this way. It does seem a bit like, oh, there's motivations you have that you don't know or that are hidden. And I don't think that's actually legitimate. I think everybody knows what they are. They deny it sometimes, but they always know for sure what it is. It's whether or not they admit it. And that's more my view, that there is no subconscious belief or some hidden belief or some subconsciously developed belief about yourself. I think it is always conscious and self-directed.
Right. But it's interesting because I have heard this many times before outside of any sort of objectivist literature. And I think there's something to it. Like here he talks about, in the first passage, he says, okay, there is a secret fear that I am destined only for pain. So I will pick someone who inevitably will reject or abandon me. In the beginning, I pretend I do not know this, so the drama can be played out. Or if I pick someone with whom happiness is possible, I subvert the relationship by demanding excessive reassurances, by venting irrational possessiveness, so on and so on. But the thing that I think is weird about this is it seems like it's almost like, according to this, the subconscious has its own intelligence, and it's like secretly functioning in the basement to make you do certain things, which I don't know about that. Like, it does seem to conflict.
Branden took too much from psychoanalysis,
Right.
Whether or not he noticed that he did. Like, I mean, I do think I don't think it's any secret fear. I think it's a fear that the person knows, but then they pretend not to have it. And that's really how I would say it. I would say the word pretend. And to get rid of the word secret.
Right.
And I think if you ask the person, they do know. It's just that they either forgot, which is possible. You can forget why you did something after a while, or why you do something. It's like, well, why do you do that? Well, I've always done it. But then you ask them, you could figure out like, oh, they started doing it at one point. Now they forget why they do it. I think that's what happens more often. Or it's just easier than make up a story and then act as if it's otherwise. I think people contradict themselves a lot, but I think they can be aware easily that they know what they did. You just gotta talk with them to figure out what it is. But I don't think it also ultimately is something secret or subconscious per se.
Yeah.
It could become automatized. That's kind of what I mean by forget. Like, you do it so long that you don't bother even reflecting on it anymore.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the sense in which there is something to this also is that, okay, so we can look at it. Actually, let me say this first. I guess we could look at it as you function a certain way and you shouldn't be condemned on the basis of that. You shouldn't be condemned or excused on the basis of that subconscious functioning, because you should be condemned on the choice you make. So you have a choice to bring consciousness to that area of your life and redirect however you're functioning, right?
Yes, that
wouldn't conflict. But then the logic I see is that you do hear like, okay, someone ends the relationship because they're scared the other person will end it first, or this kind of thing, like might be that's an example that comes to mind. And so that it's strange how it's like, he's saying there's this subconscious logic to it of how it plays out, which there's something to it, but I'm still not, I don't like to go with this idea of there's some functioning thing in your basement that's unknowable. So
Yeah, I think it's just literally that it's not secret, it's just known. Just
yeah,
get rid of
yeah,
the word secret, and then I agree with
right. It's
everything
known.
there.
It's known, but it's pushed away and it's acted upon automatically.
Yes.
Got
Or
it.
they ignore it or don't bring focus to it. They like notice it, then it's like, whatever. I'll act on impulse. I'll act immediately, or I'll act
Yeah,
in some non-rational way.
right.
And that
So
would make
there's,
sense.
yeah, you're right. That does make sense.
And then we go
More
back to the
sense.
mechanical thinking we were saying before.
Yeah. But oh yeah, mechanical thinking, right? Like functioning automatically by habit, maybe like
Yes.
coming to quick conclusions on the basis of an emotion without being in full focus and then acting on it. That would be,
Yeah, I mean, that would be the more, I think, charitable way to think of what he's trying to say here.
right.
I'm not sure if that's what he means, but I think it'd be better to couch it in those terms. That would be more proper, I think. More placing the responsibility on the person thinking on a particular way of focusing, not the having of the feeling, but the way you think about the feeling, or
Right.
what you do in response to
Right.
the feelings.
Okay. That actually makes a lot of sense then. And so in this latter part, he even says, he talks about a man who thinks that romantic fulfillment is not his story, not his life script, and to reduce anxiety must reduce his joy. And then he says, so guided unconsciously by the deepest logic of his self-concept, he begins to destroy the relationship. But you could look at this from the perspective we just discussed, which is if the person is, okay, if his self-concept is that happiness is not possible to me, and he acts in a kind of unfocused way on the basis of that emotion, then yes, the logic is he will self-destruct, right? Or something
Yes.
like that. Okay. That
Yeah,
makes
or
sense. And
because
yeah.
you habitually think that way. It's almost as if it's unconscious or subconscious. That's been, you do it for so long that you don't even realize you do it anymore,
Right.
which isn't like non-conscious. It's like, it's there if you want to think about it, but you don't choose, you choose not to.
Right.
Like I could always think about like why I don't know, like only put so much milk on my cereal. Like maybe that's not a good example, but like why do I like, so you know what I'm saying? I think just there are things I do, I don't really know why. But if
Yeah.
I think about it, I could figure it out easily.
Right.
It's something I've done for a long time. I
Right.
just, so I don't need to question it, but I always could.
Yeah. I guess the tip off is when the there's an intense emotion around it, that's your mind directing you, hey, you should probably think about this. Like if you were suddenly very anxious pouring milk into your cereal, you might need to rethink what you're doing. But if
Yes.
it's like a mundane thing that doesn't seem to have any impact on your day, that's one thing. But if it's, let's say, a decision you're making with respect to work or a relationship, then in that case, you might go, okay, it's important for me to bring more focus to this area and consciously think through whatever subconscious premises I have, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
What I found this really interesting, and I want to know what you make of it. He says, when we know, this is this bolded part here, when we know we are doomed, we behave in ways to make reality conform to our knowledge. We are anxious when there is a dissonance between our knowledge and perceivable facts. Since our knowledge is not to be doubted or questioned, it is the facts that have to be altered, hence self-sabotage. What is it that like, why is it that you'd feel like if you're, let's say you believe you're doomed to unhappiness and suddenly you're happy, why would there be like a dissonance between, it's because you're, what would that dissonance be? It's just like, okay, something bad is coming, or like I was wrong, or what I'm interested in. I don't know if you've got a take on that, but you get what I'm saying? Because there could be a dissonance because you think, okay,
Yes.
I'm happy now, but I'm going to be unhappy, so I'm worried. I'm going to be unhappy soon enough. Or he means literally, I know that this isn't true and this isn't real, and therefore I'm anxious that there's a difference. I feel like that's something else than just being worried that you'll be unhappy in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking in terms of if destruction is certain, but at the same time you don't, it's your knowledge that you're doomed. Oh, because I know I'm doomed, and that could be a dissonance with the facts, or it can conflict with the facts. But why would that make anxiety?
But
I
yeah,
don't
why would you want your
No.
knowledge? Like, why would you lean towards your so-called abstraction and holding that as the real thing when why is that more comforting?
Yeah, I don't even see it as something that most people do even.
Yeah.
Like, I understand he's saying that it's not necessarily the case. What it could happen, but it's like,
Right.
this seems pretty rare anyway. It's
Right.
not like, oh, most people, when faced with a contradiction, would rather accept what they believe rather than accept what reality is. I mean, that
Yeah.
seems to be what he's saying, but it doesn't follow that it needs to be an anxiety or doubting or self-sabotage. It's just, he's just describing the experience of dissonance and people try to resolve it. I don't think it follows that you have to add anxiety or self-sabotage. In that dissonance, yes, that pushes people to act because they want to resolve it in some way. People want to resolve contradiction. That's what I would say. But
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. The dissonance contradiction is like an inability to function or deal with reality. Like you're not understanding it. Something's going wrong.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and there's different ways to deal with it. And one is more the honest way. You make it. You find out what you misjudged or something like that, or there's a dishonest way to do it. You just forget the reality. Just go by what you believe.
Yeah.
And there's even different ways to respond to that. It could be anxiety and self-sabotage. It could be like an extreme belief that you must be right. It could even be an extreme doubt that you can know anything. I think there's different ways it could go. So I think the only takeaway you could take from this is that people respond in many different ways to experiencing a contradiction.
Right. I'm very interested actually in, as I'm reading this again. Okay, so the first part, okay, there's a couple of parts in here. So we behave in ways to make reality conform to our knowledge, meaning abstraction, self-image or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that the case of, is that, I'm reading it or interpreting it like this. Okay, so your mind, there's that concept of confirmation bias from psychology or whatever, where you're looking for evidence in support of whatever you already believe or feel. Yeah. And so you kind of, if you think you're doomed to, what is it? You're doomed, then you're going to be more alert to things that might doom you and might get in your way. And in that sense, I don't know if you're making reality conform to your knowledge, but you're at least looking for evidence for it. Maybe that's what he means when he says we're going to behave in ways to make reality conform to our knowledge. Well, I don't even know if that's going to work, because if you feel like you're doomed, you're going to be paranoid and you're going to constantly avoid destruction.
I usually find myself disagreeing with Branden when it comes to psychological responses like this.
Right.
Like more of a clinical response, like anxiety or whatnot, are things that apply to a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I usually find myself disagreeing on those points. Like, I'm not sure somebody would respond with anxiety and self-sabotage like as strongly as he would think.
Right.
I mean, I think he's right about that. The way people try to resolve their conflicts, that they could even deny reality itself as a response. But
right.
I think he's leaving out too many possibilities.
He did say earlier, I don't know if this is relevant, but I think it might be, that we often want, it's better to have, I'm trying to remember, something about the desire to have some level of control over events in your life if you're low self-esteem. I think it was from 6 Pillars. Like, it's better, for example, to destroy something outright and feel like you're in control rather than wait for it to destroy you. So that would be, I guess the example was a relationship. because then you don't know, like it could be coming at any moment, and the anticipation and the anxiety is terrifying. So you're better off just destroying it now. And so I wonder if that's what he's getting at when he says, since our knowledge is not to be doubted or questioned, it is the facts that have to be altered. Meaning, if you feel something is true, like you're doomed to unhappiness romantically, which is the example he gave, then you're in this, when you're happy, you're in this, I think this relates to what he says before, you're out of control because you're kind of just waiting for reality to punish you, and it might take time to unravel the truth. And it's like, you're in this very highly anxious state. You don't control it. Whereas if you're unhappy, just make it happen now. Like, at least you have control then. And you're like, you don't have the anxiety of not having some control over reality. That's sort of what I think that might be an interpretation. What are your thoughts? Oh,
I think that's what he's saying. I just don't think it's true. I mean, but yeah, I think that's the right interpretation.
Sorry, I just I've got a fridge here and it's just completely flooded the floor, which is strange. So
I feel like I could easily give additional explanations.